Retailers and suppliers need to stop this tug of war.
There's no forum, there isn't a mechanism, and then what ends up happening is it creates a lot of chaos.
The supplier pushes as much product as possible, but the consumer might not necessarily want as much of that product.
They're not competing against one another. They're out in the same market competing for the consumer.
Everybody wants another dashboard.
Everybody gets the dashboard. Maybe it's just because a product that's selling really well has got too little shelf space, so it's selling out twice a day. It's literally just selling out twice a day. So give it some more space.
Yeah.
That's all. And nobody saw that. It slipped through the cracks of the planning process. Now you've got a dogfight. Everyone's essentially fumbling around.
If you're a retailer, a supplier, or anybody that really is curious about what's happening beyond the shelf, this episode's for you.
Welcome back to Beyond the Aisle with Jason and Kyle. This is our second episode. We'll be unpacking the tug of war that's happening between retailers and suppliers and how that's definitely not helping consumers.
Let's get stuck into it.
Let's talk first about the problem, which is this unrelenting friction between retailers and suppliers, where that tension is coming from, what's causing it, and all the goodies in between that tension that is actually very unwanted and unhelpful. Well, I think there's two reasons why there's so much friction. The one is that retailers and suppliers are collaborating whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
They are. They're collaborating all the time, and they're often doing it by mistake. They collaborate in certain areas sporadically halfway through the process of the workflow. And that's often frustrating. So you're right in the middle of let's say planning a promotion or planning a space plan for a category or planning a range plan or a category cluster. And right in the middle of that, here comes a supplier with a smart idea. The other one is that they're negotiating with each other all the time, but they've forgotten to pull their minds towards what's going to benefit the consumer rather than themselves so much.
Yeah, and the other thing that happens is the retailer will sometimes come along to the supplier and suddenly just say, hey, listen, I need your input on planners, or can you go and generate this planogram for me? And you can't expect the supplier to just do that on demand. And obviously they jump at it, but it's not very constructive. It's being done very ad hoc, and that creates this tension, that creates this war between the two, because are they working together or are they not working together? And so that can be immensely frustrating for both parties.
Exactly. Or what you end up having is multiple suppliers for the same category that are vying to give an input on a certain area of the category plan. So now you've got a dogfight between the suppliers. They're fighting over each other around giving an input and getting that to the retailer who hasn't actually planned for it or made provision for that input. So you've got a whole lot of expert knowledge around the category, which everyone's essentially fumbling around.
Yeah, well, they're not all pointing in the same direction, trying to achieve the same goal. And so that creates this tug of war, because who's winning? Is it the supplier who speaks the loudest? Is it the retailer who asks the most? Where does the win actually happen?
There's no consistent theme. There's no framework for it. There's no specific, how would you say it? There's no forum that's made for where suppliers can actually go and give their expertise in certain areas of the category plan. Yeah. The forum is not there. There isn't a mechanism for them to exercise. So they're creating their own ones. And then what ends up happening is it creates a lot of chaos and conflict. Yeah. So another one there, for example, is that you've got multiple suppliers that are all essentially creating the same competing output. They're working over each other.
Yeah.
And they don't even realize it. And they're just trying to negotiate from each other the best deal that they can, rather than pooling their resources, their minds, their ideas, their perspectives, the scrutiny as well, so that the consumer can get a better experience when they're at the point of purchase. I think consumers often think that when you get a listing with a retailer, that it's all rainbows and butterflies and the money just rolls right in. I really don't think it's the case. I think the cost to list your product with the retailers, it's very expensive. And I think that they don't realize how tough those negotiations are behind the scenes. That's my perspective.
I know for me, when I've spoken to a lot of people that are not exposed to the retail industry, what I found very interesting is a lot of them haven't known that there's this whole category management process that even goes on behind the scenes to plan the shelf space. There's managing the relationship between the retailer and the supplier. And so I think people need to realize how much work and how much planning is going into the behind the scenes when they go into a store.
Yeah, it's almost as if people it's by accident, or it's just auto magical that you walk into a shop that's got 60,000 products, and you can quite swiftly navigate your way through to that one product that you're looking for. Like, for example, Wellington sweet chili sauce. You kind of just know where to go, and it sits in your subconscious, but you don't realize how much work actually went into the
Making
range
that convenience.
the range planning, the category-based clustering, the floor planning, the category plan, the subcategory, the segment, and sub-segment, and so on, so that you could just go and navigate to go find that one product. They don't realize how much work went into planning, the data behind the planning, the communication of these plans, the execution of these plans, and the monitoring and the compliance, and everything in between. It's one heck of a lot. What the consumer wants is they want a good experience. They want the right product at the right place at the right time. And when they're going to go and buy their products, they want that to be a pleasant experience.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what they're supposed to be cooking up.
Yeah.
That's what they're supposed to be preparing. So if you liken the relationship between a retailer and their suppliers as what should be a team effort, okay, then how is it going to benefit the cooking up of that experience if, when they're working as a team, not everybody is being heard on the right things and at the right times? That's a problem, because if you sit in any team dynamic and you have enough of the people at the table that are not feeling heard, that are not able to contribute the knowledge that they do have, the other people aren't really listening, and everybody's just trying to get what they can from the table, rather than remembering that they're trying to create a solution or a product for the end consumer and working their way backwards from there.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it doesn't help. The retailer pushes the supplier for the best possible deal, and then the supplier ends up that doesn't make it viable for them to produce more product. Or you have the supplier that pushes as much product as possible onto shelf because they want that brand presence, but the consumer might not necessarily want as much of their product. And so now you're taking away from when the consumer wants to buy something else, and they don't have that shelf space.
Yeah. So in these tough negotiations between supplier and retailer, which is okay, there's going to be tough negotiations.
Right.
That's normal and natural. But when it becomes a dogfight that's chaotic, where they forget that they're not competing against one another. The retailer is not competing with the supplier.
Yeah.
They're out in the same market competing for the consumer. That's when they forget that, and they get lost in this tension of the negotiation, that's really bad for business. I think where the tension is coming from is not only that they're collaborating by mistake, they're also forgetting what each party actually brings to the table.
Yeah.
The supplier who creates product within a category, they have certain knowledge that a buyer doesn't have. And now that doesn't mean that the buyer doesn't have knowledge of the category too.
Because they are an expert.
They are an expert, okay? But the person who's manufacturing or supplying product into a category, they also have perspective. But it's different perspectives. And when you can piece them together, that's when you can have some value. But it's no use that you've got a retailer that wants to hold all the cards to their chest and either do their planning on their own with an outsourced provider, and that's it. Nobody else must contribute because they've got all the ideas.
Yeah.
That's not helpful. It's also not helpful if you go to the opposite end of the extreme and hey everyone, let's all collaborate on everything all the time. That's also not going to work.
It's not going to be very productive.
No, it's not. So let's talk about the example where you've got 3 suppliers that are all pitching their own set of planograms for a category, for example, and one of them actually gets their planners approved. What's wrong with that situation?
What's wrong with that situation is that whilst the suppliers create their planograms, their access to data is very different to the retailer's access to data. And so what we see is that the retailer, obviously, they have their environment. That data set is completely source stock aware, DC stock aware. And so you can do forecast planning. You know exactly what's going on in the business. Suppliers, yes, they get their supplier portals and they get access to that data. And for the most part, they're also getting competitor data, but they're not seeing cost price data. They're not seeing the stock data for the stores. And so what that does is the supplier might push a planogram and not realizing that in order to implement that planogram, it's going to create a huge stock order, which, yes, will supply it. Great. For the retailer, they if they're not aware of it and they push that through, that generates a massive order through replenishment engine.
Yeah, exactly right. So now you might have that planogram that's now proved and that maybe it does generate an order. And that's off the assumption that that retailer is actually using the causal data from the planogram to drive replenishment.
Yeah.
And as you know, that's not always the case. It's easy in theory, but they're not always executing on these things. So now you've got a planogram that's going to store that's not stock aware. And which means, as you know, that the product might not be available in the store for that planogram.
Yeah. And now you have the store executing something that's necessarily different because they'll say, right, well, this product isn't here, so therefore the merchandiser ends up deviating.
So it's a massive balls up. So now there's a balls up because of the data is not working. And what happens when there's a balls up?
Everybody's pointing fingers, and that creates tension.
Exactly right. And that creates that sort of tug of war tension that's going on.
And don't even get me started on when the retailer and suppliers are using different systems, using different applications, and those tool sets don't talk to each other. And when you do try and convert the files, there might be issues, and that creates another issue.
Or let's run on the assumption that actually everything does go right for that planogram set that the supplier has now created, and it's implemented accurately in store. Okay, well done. I guess what, 2, 3, 4 weeks later, that planogram's out of date because you've added a few products on to your listings and you've delisted a few others. And the planogram's already out of date.
Yeah.
So it's not a cohesive effort between them. So they're not making effective use of data. They're not effectively pooling ideas and expertise. They're all setting up their own capabilities separately, which is a duplication of work, which is very expensive. And so everybody can see that there's layers missing and that resources are being stretched, but they can't put their finger on what the problem is. And when something's not working, what do people do?
Just point the finger.
They get very tense.
I think that retailers and suppliers are missing the point when they end up getting lost in the woodwork, and either the retailer gets frustrated with the supplier because the supplier hasn't made the deal that the retailer wanted, or the supplier is not innovating and getting the product that they should be out to market, and it leaves the consumer unthought of, and it's not fair to the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with you. And the other thing is that whilst the retailer and the supplier are so busy focused on the engine room and trying to get a good deal, that they're forgetting about what it is that the consumer actually wants to experience at the point of purchase.
At the end of the day, it's a retailer and supplier. If they work together, they look after the consumer. The consumer is going to look after them. I mean, there's published studies where they look at basket analysis. And if one product is missing from a short shopping list for a consumer, that consumer puts their basket down and they move to the next store. And the retailer and the supplier both lose in that case. So they have to work together. I think that retailers and suppliers could really use their energy where instead of dealing with all this chaos, they could rather utilize data more efficiently and use process to collaborate better. So for example, where you've got suppliers collaborating with a retailer, have it done in a structured way, so that way you also elevate the roles within the retailer, where you don't now have your buyer sitting and scrutinizing a planogram. Instead, they're working on the strategy and then allowing suppliers thereafter, let them scrutinize it. But you've always got that check and a balance. So it's not just one supplier that's going in and saying, right, well, I'm the biggest player in the game, therefore give me the most amount of shelf space. No, you get your shelf space that you deserve based on your market share. But then after all of that scrutiny is done, planogram gets refined, and now the buyer can say, yes, this fits my strategy. And the buyer can rather go focus on meeting with other suppliers, bringing in new product and getting that side of the business up and running.
Jace, tell me, what are your thoughts on these suppliers that are going out and they've got these fancy dashboards, and then you've got retailers that don't really have the capability to make decisions and let those decisions take effect?
I like that observation that you make around having all this data, doing all this analysis, and yet if you're unable to action it and you're unable to pull those levers, what difference does it make? And at the end of the day, the supplier, yes, they're going to have market intelligence. They're going to see what other retailers are doing. They're going to be privy to data that retailer might not necessarily be privy to. And so they need to be able to work with that retailer so that the retailer can actually say, oh, right, listen, we can actually take your product. Let's push it into that cluster. Okay, right. Let's take this planogram. Let's build this planogram out. Let's work together. Okay, listen, this new product, it's going to fit and perform best if we place it over here.
Yes.
And that's what's going to make the difference.
So it's almost like you always see these catchphrases around data. You want actionable insights.
Yeah.
Actionable insights. Okay, but we're all talking about these fancy insights, and you've got these ideas and these perspectives and knowledge that comes from it. But how exactly is it actionable?
Yeah.
Where's the levers? They don't focus on the levers nearly as much as they do the insights. And to me, it just seems so counterproductive. So I think that is a big problem with how data is seen and viewed.
Everybody wants another dashboard.
Everybody gets a dashboard. You get a dashboard. You get a dashboard. But we're not making decisions and letting those decisions take effect.
Yeah,
that to me is interesting. The very least. I think it's fair to say that obviously we have a view into so much of the inner workings of so many different retailers. We'd love to say this retailer does it like this, this one does it like that, but we can't. We have so many non-solutions that we're a bit tied there. But what we can say is what does work is where retailers are deliberate about how they are going to collaborate. They know where they are going to collaborate. They know where they're not going to collaborate. And when they are, they know in what format and at what time. And that's something that's a predictable, planned event. If you're a supplier and you don't know when and in what format you're going to get a window in to give input and perspective and on what, and as the opportunities are sprung up on you just sporadically at random, it's stressful for that human being.
It creates a big stress spike.
And they can't be as prepared. They can't be as relevant with their information. And it's just not a win-win.
And I think beyond that, the retailer and the supplier, they should work together. They should be ensuring that, yes, the retailer is going to drive as best a bargain with the supplier. Great, good, because oftentimes that gets passed on to the consumer. And the supplier should be listening to the retailer to see where there's opportunity gaps, where subcategories are growing, and engage on that to say, okay, well, if there's a subcategory that's growing and they've already got all of their products in that subcategory listed, hey, maybe there's a gap. Maybe there's another product they can list. And you're only going to get there if you've really got a good underpinnings of a relationship.
Yeah.
Plus the collaboration.
Yeah, and also not to make assumptions about where or you can actually add value to the partnership. I mean, some suppliers are coming in and they're literally helping these retailers to implement the plans in the stores. Yeah. And they're checking in on execution. And that might be a relevant way to help with a certain retail partner or not. But I think they need to think more deeply about how they're actually bringing value to the various partnerships that they have with their different retailers. And retailers, I think, need to be more clear about where their strengths and weaknesses are and where they can leverage their supplier strengths, where they're weak, and not be getting caught into the trap of, we know what we're doing. We don't want anyone to tell us what to do and how to run our stores. Rather, of course, you sign off on the final plan, but get perspective in the middle from the right players at the right time. You're going to end up with a much more polished plan for the consumer at the end of the day. And therefore your category is going to grow.
Makes absolute sense.
The way to use data more collaboratively and therefore more competitively, it starts with process. You have to have a defined process. And for me, I think a great starting point for any category, for any retailer is they should do category-based clustering. They should do an assortment. Okay, that must be optimized. It should be space away. And then what they should do is, I think, at the point of the planogram, the actual shelf plan where the entire category plan culminates into that planogram, what they should do is they should choose 2 to 4 supplier partners. One should be the category captain, and you should have another 3. Not too many more than 3. I think 3 is fine, where they now give input on this planogram. So quite literally a good process to me would look as follows. You'd have your strategy session around the planogram with a buyer, the category captain, and a independent third party that actually does the planning work and uses the software and implements the philosophy of category.
Yeah.
From there, the planner goes off and does a first draft. Then that first draft is opened up to the remaining 3 suppliers, the supplier partners, and the category captain to give scrutiny, to give input, and to give contrasting perspectives. So there's no overweighting on one brand's bias. You've got to have the contrasting perspective. And then what the planner should then go and do is implement the changes which they honestly believe are in the best interest of the category's overall performance, and then take that final polished plan to the buyer for final sign-off. Of course, once that's working and it's in flow and it's working very well, then you can extend to other areas of category management and collaborate there. But that's a starting point. Get that right, and you'll already be in a much better place. But talk to us a little bit about the software side, because there's a lot of technicalities beyond what I've shared from a process point of view.
Yeah. So I'm very excited about this side of the business, because we've now developed a piece of software that is going to completely enable this collaboration in a really efficient way. So the benefit for the retailer is that they're going to ensure that sensitive data isn't leaked out to the different suppliers. So for example, when that planogram gets distributed, you're not going to have each supplier's cost of sales. So that competitive data is not going to be distributed, but the sales and the units movement is. So that's a big win for the retailer, and it protects each of their suppliers. For the supplier, their win on software and on process is that they don't have to now and say, okay, well, I've got to build this planogram for X retailer, and in order to do that, I've got to now go and prepare some data. I've got to bring that into my software. No, when you run the planogram through the collaboration function, that data is in the planogram ready to go with its relevant reports. And so the supplier can start working on that immediately. They just open it up, start working on it. They pass comments, and simply once they're done, they just submit the planogram, and it goes back to the planner once all the suppliers have made their comments. And each supplier's comment is only visible by them until it gets to the planner, and the planner gets to see all of the comments. So both the retailer and the suppliers are all getting the right data at the right time without it being an inconvenient process.
I see you're smiling a bit there, because you know what happens with that plan when it gets right to the end point, and there's always the question of, why does it look like this or like that? And then there's the he said, she said about who said what along the way. And that viewer application captures all that feedback along the way, so that you can go and refer back to it and say, no, but we made this change for these reasons. Here it is. There's a strong merit and an argument for it. Or we rejected that feedback because it was impractical for the following reasons, or it wasn't in the best interest for these reasons. So that whole argument is then out the way. And we know, if anyone who's worked in retail will know, that is a dogfight on its own.
Yeah.
And even internally, that's like a dogfight within just the retailer's environment, let alone the suppliers.
And don't even get me started when retailers and suppliers start working across different data sets. one's working on 6 months data, one's working on 1 month, one's working on this cluster versus one's working on total business. And everybody's perspectives is changing all the time. Whereas with this, you're going to make sure that every single person that's working on that planogram is working on the identical data set, looking at the same picture from the same perspective. And that's going to make a massive difference. And finally, when that all comes together, buyers are able to look at that planogram, click approve, that planogram gets processed, all the causal data is extracted, ready for your replenishment engine, and is realized at store when they log into their store communications tool, and they can implement the planogram.
All this planning work that we're doing, a lot of minds, a lot of perspective, a lot of expertise and resource that goes into the planning. How do we make sure that that's actually executed in the store as intended and that there's transparency?
Yeah, part of the collaboration function within the application is that your planogram now goes to store. Your merchandisers or store manager is then able to log into a mobile app. They go to the category. They only see the categories or the planograms that are relevant for their store. So they can never say, oh, right, well, I'm looking at store X, but I'm actually store Y. That's not possible. The system doesn't allow them to.
Yeah.
Whereas I know there's a lot of very old school retailers out there, they might still be using an FTP site where they just drop all the planograms in and hope that the guys are looking at the right one. So once they go into this mobile app, they go to the category, they take photos of each drop, image recognition then validates the products against that category. It looks at product placement as well as the product presence. And obviously now once we've got the data, we can always extrapolate those reports out, and that dashboard becomes available to the retailer as well as the supplier. They're going to start being able to see compliance data. And that's going to become really magical for the supplier when you look at stuff like trade agreements, where the supplier has agreed to get a certain amount of space for a certain price, and they're able to see that compliance data and see that that's being executed.
They actually got what they
actually got. Or
agreed.
did they get more? Did they get less?
Yeah.
Or did the planogram that they collaborate on, did it actually get to the store? And are the stores executing? So I think it is going to put a lot more pressure back on the operations on the ground in the stores, which is where I think another big disconnect is happening between head office of retailer and in-store.
But does it not go back to the old issue of transparency creates good governance?
100%.
Because now you can actually see, using the image recognition technology, what is being implemented at the point of purchase, to what extent, what does it actually look like? And not only is the retailer able to read that, but you've got multiple suppliers from the category that's also able to read that. And they're obviously very interested in how much share of the shelf they're getting. They don't want just one facing less than what they're supposed to. So this is something they're going to look at.
Yeah.
And not police, but they'll at least be an improved sense of governance over the execution at store level.
And ultimately, the consumer is going to benefit, because let's say now through this compliance checking, you're seeing out of stocks happening. Those out of stocks, who does that impact the most? The consumer. You go there, you want to go and buy your favorite coffee and it's out. Very frustrating.
Yeah.
So now that supplier realizes, oh, but flip, I'm always the one that's out of stocks. What's wrong with my supply chain? Okay, go solve the problem, find where the root is.
And sometimes it's not even a thing that goes deep into the supply chain. Maybe it's just because a product that's selling really well has got too little shelf space, so it's selling out twice a day. It's literally just selling out twice a day. So give it some more space.
Yeah,
that's all. And nobody saw that. It slipped through the cracks of the planning process because the people that worked on it were just mindless fools. They're not. They're just working through volume, and it slipped through the cracks.
Yeah.
There needs to be a fundamental mindset shift from the top down. So for starters, you have to have executive level sponsorship when driving any meaningful change in an organization. You have to have it. And of course, you need buy-in throughout the levels of the organization, but it starts with the leadership. And you've got to have that. And what this is really about is it's about knowing that 1 or 2 or 3 or a team of 10 or 15 people can't have all the ideas for all the things. It's not possible. It's not possible to have all the ideas for things. but it is also, it's much better to create an environment where the right ideas can come to the table at the right time. They have to cultivate that environment. So they have to create a way of working where you can tap into each role player's expertise. And the expertise doesn't stop within your own retailer organization.
Yeah.
You have to look to your suppliers as well. They've got expertise that they can share, but your mindset is going to shift towards acknowledging that they've got value to share.
Yeah.
That's really important. The next thing is that you want them to share the right knowledge at the right time in a relevant way, not sporadically by accident and pie in the sky and not actionable.
Yeah.
That's the biggest mindset change that has got to happen. And then I think the other one is that when you have other people giving scrutiny or perspective or input, it doesn't mean that you're losing control of the process. Not at all. What it means is you're getting more hands on deck to prop up your business and what you're doing.
I think another mindset that also needs to shift is that of trust. The trust that from the retailer to the supplier, that the suppliers are going to give appropriate feedback, that they're not going to try and just advantage themselves. Trust that they're going to put the consumer first. And the supplier needs to trust that the retailer is going to bring them in the right ways constructively. And the only way that you get that right is when you start showing up. You show up and you action it and you drive that. And that, when you get that right at the top level, guess what's going to happen? Your stores are going to trust your planograms and they're not going to get frustrated. And they're going to end up implementing, which means that your compliance is going to be much easier. And you're no longer having to absolutely scrutinize compliance, but instead you're doing your spot checks. You're using the image recognition to check it. And you're seeing that the stores are implementing, which means your operational commands from executive level right down to store implementation is happening because the trust isn't broken at any one of the points.
For those that are worried about people that don't always operate on the basis of good faith, because it happens. Well, put an independent third party in the middle and make them liable.
And we enjoy that hot potato.
Yeah, we enjoy that hot potato. It's sometimes an unenviable one, but when you got enough skin in the game and you know how it works, you know what the pitfalls are, you end up with a result that's really exciting. And you make a change, and it's a multi-organization change. And that's where I think it gets really exciting.
Yeah. So to wrap up the conversation, I would say that retailers and suppliers need to collaborate with each other so that they can stop this tug of war, this tension, and they can work together, utilize data, utilize process, and bring together those efficiencies, pool resources. And if you're not sure how to get this going and you're not sure where to even start, come talk to us. We can sit down with you. We'll look at your business, whether you're a supplier, whether you're a retailer, and we'll help you to gain this strategy and get going with the next steps into this program.
And also, I think definitely recognize that there's a heck of a lot of convenience in the additional scrutiny if it's in the right places, the right times. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
Just a quick thanks to all of our viewers. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Or if you're a supplier out there and you saw an absolute blunder happening in front of your eyes and you just could not get a window in to say, hey, fix that little piece or part, it'll make all the difference, and you would just shut out, share your story, or if you have any other perspectives around how collaboration should or should stop working, please do share in the comments.
Hope you guys enjoyed the show. Until next time, I hope you guys have a great day.
We'll see you on episode 3 of Beyond the Aisle with Jason and Carl.